We have the opportunity to hear from our speaker, Dave Getz. I won't go into all of the interesting details of his life and career that were printed in your invitation, but Major Dave, as he is often called, is a native of Raleigh, North Carolina, and a retired Army officer. He has done everything from serving as a military police investigator to working in the National Guard to teaching as an assistant professor to holding the position of commander of an American Legion post. He is currently self-employed as an international development consultant. He lives with his wife Joanne in Youngsville, North Carolina, and we are honored to have him speak to us today about bringing the GOP and Tea Party together on common principles. At the conclusion of his question and answer time, which he wants to spend a lot of time on because he has good energy from this room, Glen Englram of the Blue Ridge Tea Party will take a minute to explain the local Tea Party activity and how you can join in if you are interested. So please welcome Major Dave.
Just in case I have a Rubio moment. It really is an honor to be here with you today. I did not prepare a written speech for the same reason my mother does not grab a recipe book every time she walks in the kitchen. Sometimes you just don't know what you're going to do, but it'll come to you. I much prefer to have a conversation. So when she told me she was allowing me 30 minutes, I thought I'd set a little groundwork for it and then basically take your questions, because that's where we get the real meat in everything that we do, is having the conversation between people. Many of you, some of you may know me from Facebook. If you're on Facebook at all, look me up. I'm on there simply as Major Dave. Send me a friend request. I'd love to connect with you. Over the last several years, I've been traveling the state, got involved in politics. Of course, the Hatch Act kept me out of politics when I was in uniform. And I ran into a gentleman named Bill Randall down in my area in the 13th district that was running for Congress. I had a sound system. I had a high-def video camera. I know the candidates pay good money to people for those resources to help promote their campaigns. I gave him my business card. 3 weeks later, I was his events coordinator. And before the campaign was over, I was his debate coach and a legislative researcher digging up dirt on Brad Miller. In those 6 counties of the 13th district that stretched all the way from Wake up to beyond Greensburg and Guilford and Rockingham counties up there, I met some of the greatest North Carolinians you'd ever hope to meet in your life. And I learned about the grassroots movement. I've been a Republican since I was 18, never been anything else but. I registered so that I could vote for Nixon. Daddy handed me a suitcase and said, come see us next time you're in town. That's no lie. I've always been a conservative, and I took the oath of office 6 different times during my career. And it occurred to me, people say, well, you took an oath to the Constitution. No, I didn't. I took an oath about the Constitution, about my belief in it, and my pledge to support and defend it. But ladies and gentlemen, my oath was to you. It was to the American people of what I was willing to do, what I was willing to stand up and be counted for. And I think we lose something in that distinction, because the Constitution does not stand alone. As she said, it was designed to put limits on government. What put limits on us? And this is where we really distinguish conservatives from libertarians. Libertarians talk about freedom, smaller government, being able to choose for yourself. Well, I understand that, but the difference between freedom and liberty, freedom is the absence of restraint. Liberty is the exercise of freedom within established bounds. And the disagreement becomes, where do we draw that line? Nothing more clearly points to that than the issue of gay marriage that came before us in the election last May. 60% of the voters voted in favor of that marriage amendment. The conservative base in North Carolina is strong, and it crosses party lines. People are driven by values. It's what we hold dear. And that you are willing to give up a few hours one day a month to come to a meeting like this, reflects your commitment to promoting those values. I was looking at the handouts on the table. I am a Republican because, and I read down through each and every item on that list. I read through the similar sheet from the Tea Party Patriots and what they stand for. There's not a single thing on one that conflicts or disagrees with the other. In some counties here in North Carolina, you can't tell the difference between the local Tea Party and the Republican Party because they're one and the same. And in the next county, the two groups won't even talk to each other. Now, why is that? We have to learn how to influence the effects that labels like that have on us and how it causes us to see other people. I know people out there that are every bit members of the Republican Party, very active in the Tea Party. Their issues is illegal immigration. And if you don't want to talk about illegal immigration, they don't even want to have the conversation. That's their hot button issue. For others, it's the pro-life movement. For others, it's Second Amendment issues. That's wonderful. Why does it divide us? I always say that I'm so proud of our military and grateful that we have guys that like to fly jets and guys that like to drive submarines and guys that like to roll around in the mud and blow stuff up. Because it takes all of them to win the war. And just because they fight together doesn't mean they get cozy with each other. Mr. Vice introduced himself to me here. He says, he's retired Air Force. He asked me what branch I was from. I said, the Army. What did he say to me? Well, I won't hold it against you. Folks, that's a healthy attitude that builds camaraderie and competition. But it doesn't make us adversaries. We're all on the same team. Most of the people that I have met at the grassroots level in the various Tea Party and conservative groups in North Carolina are in fact registered Republicans. Many of them choose to get active in the grassroots movement simply because that's where people are getting something done. Not every GOP organization in the state is as organized and effective as it could be. So they said, well, if you're not going to let me do it, then I'm going to go over here and work with these people. Folks, that's the solution to the problem. Go with what works. If the Republican Party were to claim that it was responsible for victory in the marriage amendment vote, how silly would that sound? They get a lot of the credit, but they darn sure didn't do it alone. Justice Newby would not be sitting in his seat today if it were not for the additional efforts of the grassroots people who got behind him. I think we can clearly say the same thing about Dan Forrest. You will achieve unity much faster by looking for reasons to work with someone rather than defining terms under which they will be allowed to work with you. We all have skin in the game, and we all deserve a seat at the table. 3 years ago, RNC Chairman Reince Priebus said that GOP is part of the conservative movement, not the other way around. And ever since then, I've been wrestling with just what is this conservative movement? They don't have a headquarters. They don't have a leader. It's not. It's an attitude. It's an ideal. And it's made up of all of these groups of people. We have a right in this country to disagree. It's healthy. It's what creates the debate. And the biggest thing that I see hampering or hindering us today is we're not having this conversation often enough with enough people. The biggest vote that influenced the outcome in November, to my way of thinking, wasn't the few libertarians that might have voted for a third-party candidate. It was the 3 million registered Republicans who did not even bother to go to the polls and cast a vote. That's our bread and butter. Why have they abandoned us? And it's time for the party to do some real serious soul searching about how our message gets out there. We've lost our brand reputation. when you have people like Carl Rose standing up in Washington talking about cutting out the Tea Party. The only reason I don't take more specific exception to that comment is because I don't know who he means by it. I know of no one single definition that describes all Tea Party groups uniformly. My premise to you today is you can have unity without uniformity. The Marines are very different from the Air Force, from the Army, and from the Navy. Each one is separate and distinct, and they serve a useful purpose. Every one of these Second Amendment groups that's out there fighting against these gun confiscation issues that, if you're not aware, are very real. You have sheriffs out there saying, well, I don't know if I would go along with an executive order or not. Let me check with the Sheriff's Association, see what they say. Our rights cannot survive based on a consensus opinion like that. We either have leaders in public office that understand the Constitution, that understand the Declaration of Independence, and you cannot have one without the other. One of the core tenets of any military instruction is always go back to basics. We appeal to the supreme judge for the rectitude of our intentions. God help make right what we do. We have a tax code that's already taken politics out of religion. And now we're faced with the government's broader effort to take religion out of politics. The first 3 words in the preamble to the Constitution explain why that can never happen. We the people. You cannot have a government of a godly people that functions on any other basis. How can a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, who are a godly people, be an ungodly, amoral, secular government? I don't know of a single person that you can elect to office and send to Raleigh who can park their values at the door of the legislative building when they go inside to do our business. It doesn't happen. So the debate has now become, where do we draw those lines? The battles are out there. And everything has a moral issue. If we lose the moral argument on any one issue, we lose it for all of them. Because, ladies and gentlemen, when they declared that the laws of nature and of nature's God formed the basis for everything that we did, when we step away from that, this goes in the trash. We cannot exist on any other basis because it is only those higher laws under which we are all truly equal. If we live under the law of man, then we become subject at some point to whichever one of us is strongest and who has the power to impose their will on somebody else. And that's what we have to get back to in this country. Now, so how does this relate to the Tea Party and the Republican Party? The Tea Party itself is a very diverse organization. You've got strong social conservative members in it. You've got some very libertarian-leaning people that are within it. The issue is not to make one group like the other. The issue is to focus on what we have in common and the ground that we can work together on. You have a Chamber of Commerce here in town, and all the businesses become members, and they get together on a regular basis, and they talk about the business climate and the things that enhance what they do, and the guy sitting in the chair next to you is your competition. Why are you sitting there next to him? Because there are things that you can do in that type of atmosphere that enhance everybody's chances at what they do. To me, that is the mindset that the leadership of both sides of that equation have to adopt. Civitas is holding their conference in Raleigh next weekend, their annual Conservative Leadership Conference. And it's a great event. Michelle Malcolm's coming in to speak, and they're going to talk for 2 days, and we'll be hashing things around like this, and then to go home. What do we do the other 365 days 363 days a year. What's missing is that executive level body. And what I am proposing is the creation of a conservative leadership council here in North Carolina, and invite the members of Heritage, Americans for Prosperity, Freedom Works, the Tea Party, the Republican Party. Get the leadership of all of these conservatives together to start addressing the 4 C's: communication, cooperation, coordination, and collaboration. And if we can get all these leaders of these groups together on a regular basis, we can stop some of the stepping on each other's toes that we've seen going on, where you got Tea Party working the polling place, and the Republican Party working the polling place, and the Second Amendment of the pro-life people working the polling place, and at the poll down the street, ain't nobody there. There are ways we can do what we do and do it better and do it cheaper. And if the Army teaches you anything, it's how to do more with less. I made a couple of commercials for Ed Goodwin. Just drove down to Eden to his farm and shot him down on the farm for a couple of days. Got him a couple of thousand views on YouTube. It cost me a tank of gas. It didn't take a $2,500 or $5,000 budget to go pay some production studio to do it. We got kids like the Riddleberger kids with C4GC out of Greensboro making commercials. Dan Forrest's own kids made one at home and put on YouTube for him. That brought him a lot of public exposure in the very early days of his campaign and really helped get him out there. There are a lot of ways that we can do what we do better, do it more effective. But I could not be honest at the federal level as an advocate for states' rights if I wasn't also an advocate at the county, state level for county rights. And when it comes to the county GOP organizations, I think there is oftentimes too much top-down, this is how you're going to do what you need to do. Clear example of that, when the Romney folks came in the last election cycle, they went into Chowan County, down in Edenton, where Ed Goodwin's from, 15,000 people in the county. Set up a phone center. Yanked it a couple of weeks later because they weren't making enough phone calls. Well, folks, people in Chowan County don't like to make political phone calls, and that's because they don't like to get political phone calls. It was a waste of money. Nobody bothered to ask the people in Chowan County, well, what are you doing? What's your plan? How are you organized? You know, do you have a plan for victory? It's totally different to come in and say, what can we help you with? Now, and I don't mean that tongue-in-cheek, because one of the biggest jokes in the Army is, you know, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But actually, yes, you can make that true. You don't campaign door-to-door up here in the 11th District like you do down in Wake County. You can right here in the city, maybe in some neighborhoods. But a mile up the mountain, down across the valley, and a mile up the mountain, to the next mountain, to the next house? No, it doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. We need to push some of that power back down. And I know that scares a lot of people in the hierarchy of the party. It scares them for the same reason it scares Washington, that the Tea Party and the grassroots people are rising up wanting their power back. Because again, the first 3 words of that Constitution, we the people. It's about us. But Dave, you just don't know what it's like in Raleigh and that legislation having to deal with all these people. Folks, at the end of the day, that doesn't matter. And I hate to sound so cold and callous, but what matters at the end of the day is what affects you and me back here at home. Because if it doesn't, they're in the wrong business. And we have got to reshape that attitude of government, that it is about us. We are not some anecdotal afterthought that they only listen to during the election cycle. Because it's affecting our children and our grandchildren who are going to be paying off this debt burden that we leave to them. I am not willing to give up my Second Amendment rights on the premise that I can keep my gun, only my children can't inherit it. I'm not willing to sacrifice their Second Amendment rights for the sake of, as the price for keeping mine. They're either worth fighting for or they aren't. Now, I've been encouraged to seek office in the Republican Party. People say, well, which office do you want to run for? It's not a matter which office I want to run for, to be frank with you. The chair and vice chair for the state will be elected at the convention in June. And who the next chair and vice chair are, who will decide largely the direction this party goes in, will be determined by the delegates on the floor. I am certainly willing to serve in either position. And my fundamental reason is you should not vote for any person for vice chair that you would not also vote for chair. Because their first duty is to step up and act in the absence of the chair. A lot of things can happen. You know, quite frankly, if the legislature doesn't produce some tangible results between now and June, it may not matter who the state chair is after June. They've got a majority in both houses of the legislature, a conservative majority on the Supreme Court, and Governor McCrory in the governor's mansion. The choice is theirs to produce. I think they're headed in the right direction. I see positive things coming out of there. As we were talking about the new gun control legislation that Senator Brunstetter had offered, I think you're going to see that yanked back pretty quick. I think that was a knee-jerk thing that nobody really sat down and read and thought through, because that has the potential to totally undo the castle doctrine that we managed to get passed last year, to allow us greater latitude in defending ourselves in our own homes. That's a fundamental right that none of us could afford to sacrifice, not for any measure of political expediency. So I hope I've laid some groundwork and helped you see that there's a lot of reason to work with all these different independent groups. Work with the ones you can work with. The ones you butt heads with, step aside. There are other people out there, and they're all over. The biggest thing to finding those solutions is having this conversation. And if you don't know, ask somebody, because somebody else knows. I've yet to meet a person that didn't have an opinion. So with that, I thank you for listening. I hope I've kind of cut down to the chase of it, but because I'll be followed by Ken here, I wanted to give that opportunity to have some of this dialogue with you. I came as much to listen and to hear from you as well about what your experiences have been in interactions between these groups, and to answer any other questions you have about the grassroots movements and relationship with the party. Pam.